Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Monday episode of Stand Up. I have got a big deal guest joining me today, the author of a brand new book just out, Why Fascists Fear Teachers, Public Education and the Future of Democracy. It's none other than the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten, joins me today. She is as powerful, as fascinating, as convincing, and as awesome as always. I love Randi. I've known her for a long time. I've interviewed her several times. I've joined her on panels and been supportive, of course, of teachers and public school teachers, particularly my whole life because my mom was a public school teacher. Randi Weingarten and I today on her brand new book, which is real good. I'm not just saying that. It's not, she's always great, but this book is very good. I learned a lot. It's inspiring, and it's kind of an instruction manual of sorts. I think you're going to love it. And if you want to jump right to the conversation, if you want to get started with it, it begins at about 26 minutes in today. But like every day's show, I've got your headlines and clips like nobody does it. And there is, of course, a lot going on in the world, and it's Monday, so there's a lot from the weekend that I want to share with you. So let's jump to it right now. And remember, I can't do it without your support. This is an ad-free show. I don't take ad dollars. I am only supported by subscribers like you, and welcome to new subscribers as well as old subscribers. What's up, Steve Barefoot? Haven't heard from you in a long time, but I did over the weekend, and it made me real happy. Welcome back to the show, to the fold, and to the stand-up community, where almost every week I host Hangouts at 8 p.m. on Monday and Thursday to bring us all together, to connect, to share, to network, and to prove the importance of community now more than ever. And yeah, it's been a hell of a week. Of course, for me, I did like 10 appearances on different media outlets from Canada, a couple in Canada and Australia, of course, CNN a couple of times, and several other shows, podcasts, and more. And I want to thank everybody who reached out and said nice things, especially after that CNN appearance with Boris Sanchez. Got a lot of attention. That one went pretty viral, and people said very nice and generous and supportive things, which is great because I may never appear on there again. Now, I think they'll have me back. CNN likes me, and maybe not that show, but maybe that show. I mean, I talked to Boris for a while after the conversation. We texted back and forth, and we're going to grab a beer. So hopefully it's cool, but I just want to thank everybody for all the kind words and support. As we enter into fascism, it's scarier and harder to get your voice out there. I cannot do it, of course, without your support. So thank you to everybody supporting me and the show and the community. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic is the place to go to pay for a subscription for as little as $5 or more. And thank you to everybody who also started paying more, I think, as a result of some of those appearances and everything that's happening in the world. Much appreciated. Very grateful. So let's do it. Time for your headlines and the clip show.
It's Pete's Headlines and Clip Show. Get in on the shit show.
Yeah, there he goes. A Grammy Award-winning singer, songwriter, composer, arranger John Carroll, of course, founding member of the Starland Vocal Band. See him on tour right now with Mary Chapin Carpenter, by the way. Then he and his band are going to be performing in Massachusetts at the end of October, and at the beginning of November, you can catch him down in Virginia for the official release show. I'm thinking about going to that. November 6th, Thursday, November 6th, 7 p.m. in Purcellville, Virginia, the Franklin Park Performing and Visual Arts Center. I might go to that, so maybe meet me in Virginia. I don't know. But support John Carroll, johncarroll.org, everybody. All right, here's what we've got for your headlines from the weekend. Of course, it was a crazy weekend. Our Mad King essentially threatened to fire his attorney general if she didn't immediately indict his political enemies. He then appointed one of his former personal lawyers to serve as U.S. Attorney General in Virginia after he forced the resignation of the previous appointee because he concluded there was insufficient evidence to indict the New York AG, Letitia James. Just to be clear, because his former U.S. Attorney in Virginia could not find a way to prosecute one of his political enemies who had prosecuted him, our Attorney General here in New York, he fired him. He said this in a Truth Social post. He threatened the AG, Pam Bondi, and that's just one of the crazy things that he did over the weekend. We also learned that his Department of Justice ended an investigation into his border czar, who was caught on camera taking a $50,000 cash bribe. Did you see this about Tom Homan? His Pentagon top brass threatened to expel journalists who report info not cleared by them, which is crazy. His White House spoke to a shady deal that will see TikTok in the hands of a consortium of GOP mega donors, including, it looks like, the Murdochs. And he also threatened bad things if we don't take back Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan. And his most senior counterterrorism official is in a Twitter spat with a conspiracy theory white supremacist named Laura Loomer. None of this is normal. It's all very dangerous and corrosive to democracy. But those are just a few of the things that happened in Trump world over the weekend that I didn't want you to miss. But going back to that Tom Homan thing, he was recorded, according to the New York Times, in September of 24, accepting, so this is last year now, he was recorded accepting this bag of $50,000 in cash in an undercover FBI investigation. That was later shut down by the Trump administration officials. The cash payment was made inside a bag from the food chain Kava, which grew out of a long-running counterintelligence investigation that had been not targeting Tom Homan. So Homan's encounter with the undercover agents, recorded on audio tape, led him to be investigated for potential bribery and other crimes after he apparently took the money and agreed to help the agents who were posing as businessmen secure future government contracts related to border security. After Trump took office this year, Department of Justice officials shut down the case. Emil Bove, a former senior DOJ official and one-time personal attorney for Trump, who is now a federal appeals court judge, expressed skepticism about the case. Megyn Kelly said, "We do not care. Don't bother Tom Homan. He's a national treasure." So we'll see if anything else happens with that, but I thought that was a pretty big, important story to mention. NBC is reporting that the federal investigation into the assassination of Charlie Kirk is yet to find a link between the alleged shooter Tyler Robinson and any left-wing groups on which Trump and his administration have pledged to crack down after the killing. One person familiar with the federal investigation said that thus far there's no evidence connecting the suspect with any left-wing groups. Every indication so far is that this is one guy who did one really bad thing because he found Charlie Kirk's ideology personally offensive. Let's go to California now, where the Associated Press and everybody else is reporting that California became the first state to ban most law enforcement officers, including federal immigration agents, from covering their faces while conducting official business under a bill that was signed Saturday by Governor Gavin Newsom, swiftly denounced by Trump administration officials. Over the weekend, Chuck Schumer posted, breaking, Hakeem Jeffries and I are demanding a meeting with Trump on his decision to shut down the federal government because of the Republican desire to continue to gut the health care of the American people. Trump was asked about Schumer's demand, and he was asked, will you meet with the Democratic leaders to talk about how to avoid a shutdown? Trump said, I will, but they don't care about the crime. They want to keep men and women's sports. They want all this stuff. They don't want to change. They haven't learned from the biggest meeting they've ever taken just about. I'd love to meet with them, but I don't think it's going to have any impact. Plus, you should know I just shit my pants. So we'll see what happens with the potential government shutdown, which is just days away. Reuters is reporting that the Department of Defense has informed European diplomats that it will end long-running military assistance to NATO countries bordering Russia, including Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and others on the eastern flank. Funding cut to zero starting next fiscal cycle. The U.S. aid for training, equipment, and weapons purchases under programs like the Baltic Security Initiative will be eliminated, and that is a big bad deal. We don't like that. In response, Republican Don Bacon of Nebraska said the House voted by voice unanimously to increase the Baltic Security Initiative spending. The Pentagon is out of step and at odds with Congress on this. But it looks like our Department of Justice is run by friends of Vladimir Putin now. So that's a terrible thing. Also announced that there is now going to be a $100,000 charge for H-1B visas. Economist Justin Wilfers said the administration can also offer a $100,000 discount to any person, company, or industry that it wants, replacing rules with arbitrary discretion. Want visas? You know who to call and who to flatter. Let me spell it out. Trump's only leverage over Jimmy Kimmel and ABC came from FCC regulation. Now his direct power over H-1B visas gives him similar leverage over tech, higher ed, and others. You admit the people we want or else. So that's really, really bad. Washington Post is reporting that monthly home sales have recently bottomed out, reaching lows last seen after the Great Recession in early 2000s. Americans aren't leaving their jobs or getting new ones. Hiring has stalled considerably this year, with employers adding 88,000 jobs in the past 3 months, roughly one-third of last summer's count. And census data shows that Americans are generally moving less to new homes or new cities than they have in decades. And, of course, yesterday there was a giant funeral at a stadium, and then must have been ceremonies around the country in different churches for Charlie Kirk, because there was one at a church in my town where all the right-wingers were bragging about how they went and celebrated this white supremacist. But the stadium memorial was on par with like a state funeral in scale and security. It was in Phoenix. You may have seen clips. You may have heard things. It was pretty crazy. I mean, I actually didn't see any of it yet, or I was traveling yesterday and I didn't pay attention to it. I was happy to see that Charlie Kirk's widow forgave the shooter, which I thought was the Christian thing to do, apparently. And unfortunately, Trump went up after and said he hates his opponents and made it all terrible. It was really awkward because of his behavior, as far as I can tell, but I'm not ignoring it in the clip show and in the headlines. I just didn't pay that much attention to it, and I like to cover things as well as I can. So I don't have much more for you on that. I'm sure that we will talk about it, of course. And, of course, we are kicking off in New York, the UN General Assembly, one of the largest, most complex events of the year, and in Midtown Manhattan. Lots happening. You'll hear about that from this week. Also, the Jewish holidays this week. It's Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the Jewish New Year. And so want to keep those things in the zeitgeist in perspective for this coming week. That is it, though. That's all the headlines that I've got for you. Now I want to play a whole bunch of clips, and then we'll get to my conversation with Randi Weingarten. First, here is Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, announcing the new law against banning masks from all law enforcement officers.
Quite literally disappearing. No due process, no rights in a democracy where we have rights. Immigrants have rights. And we have the right to stand up and push back. And that's what we're doing here today. This is a disgrace. This is an outrage, what we have allowed to happen in this country. And I could not be more proud of this legislature, the legislative authors, to the community demanding more from all of us at this moment to push back. I'll be signing a bill, the first in the nation, saying enough. To ICE, unmask. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of?
There you go. That is the governor of California. And now let's head over to Last Week Tonight, which aired last night on HBO. And John Oliver did a number on Tom Iger, Walt Disney, and all of the executives who are bending the knee, kissing the ring, and capitulating to the regime. Here is a little bit of that.
One day, the history of the time we're living through is going to be written. And when it is, I'm not sure it's those in this administration who are even going to come off the worst. Now, don't get me wrong, they're going to come off terribly. But history is also going to remember the cowards who definitely knew better, but still let things happen, whether it was for money, convenience, or just comfort. And I know this is something of a tough sell, and it can be a bit of anathema to risk-averse business leaders. But I will say this, if we've learned nothing else from this administration's second term so far, and I don't think we have, is that giving the bully your lunch money doesn't make him go away. It just makes him come back hungrier each time. They are never going to stop. They've literally said that openly. After Kimmel's suspension, Trump posted, "That leaves Jimmy and Seth, two total losers, on fake news NBC. Their ratings are also horrible. Do it, NBC."
All right, there you go. John Oliver, and of course, that's just a quick clip. And I almost fell for an AI clip of Jimmy Kimmel breaking his silence, and it sounded exactly like him, so that was a little scary. If I ever do, and I probably will, and have in the past fallen for false news, fake news, I will issue a correction here on Stand Up. I try to practice journalistic rules, and that is another good reason to be a paying subscriber. I'm not going to report things I've just heard or hearsay if they're not well sourced by more than one source. Generally speaking, I'm not going to probably mention them or play them here on the show. So you'll have that commitment from me as well. And I've heard from Jimmy Kimmel writers, by the way, 2 writers that I know reach out to me and said nice things about the clip they saw of me on CNN talking about Jimmy and comedy and free speech, and I am super grateful for that. That made my day yesterday to hear from both of them. Okay, moving on. Let's get to a farmer. I thought this was interesting. This guy's name is Mark Alford. He's at a town hall in Missouri. We're going to be hearing from a lot of farmers pretty soon, but this guy and many others are real pissed about the tariffs and whether or not they're going to be able to sell their crops they've been spending every day growing.
Agriculture has taken a heck of a hit on a lot of misinformation, and he is not helping the farmer. I mean, we farm about 3,500 acres. We are going to be so far in the red after the crop comes off, sold. You can only sit on it so long. You got bills to pay, and now we're dealing with 7, 8, 9, 10% operating notes at the local bank. You know, when are you going to stand up for us instead of kissing his ass for these trade deals? And the tariffs. More so the tariffs than the trade.
All right, you're going to hear from a lot more farmers, I'm sure, very, very soon. This is a very important, imminent situation for farmers across the country as they go to their fall harvests and make the year's worth of money because they've got their crops to sell to a market like China and soybeans or not. So I want to stay very closely on that. Probably should have a guest on it, actually, who has data for us to share and learn more about, because that matters. All right. Also want to share these clips from Lina Khan, who is one of the smartest people you can possibly find. She is the former FTC chief under Biden and was celebrated by progressives from Jon Stewart to many others for doing what no one had been able to try to do for like 40 years in America, which was crack down on consolidation and monopolies in the country. And when FCC chair Brendan Carr threatened ABC over a controversial monologue by comedian Jimmy Kimmel, well, FTC chair Lina Khan warns that today's consolidated media landscape is caving to the Trump administration, like every other industry's political demands and huge implications for democracy. This is such a good and important conversation to interview. I highly recommend you watch all 10 minutes of it. But here's a little more than 3 minutes.
Is a really opportune time for this country's corporations to stand up.
Well, look, I think what we are seeing right now is a very clear display of how monopolies and concentrated economic power work hand in hand with authoritarian figures. As you noted, what this is about for the president is concentrating political control, and it is so much easier to do that when you have an economy that is as concentrated as we have today. If you're a president who wants to censor your critics, media markets where 5 companies control everything make it much easier to do so than markets where you have 50 or more companies. And so this is really just putting in stark illustration how the extreme consolidation of economic power that we've seen in this country over the last few decades is now ripe for abuse by a president with such authoritarian leadings.
And this is not an abstraction. We go right back to Wednesday and Brendan Carr's comments on that podcast, which a few hours later resulted in the sidelining of Jimmy Kimmel. It was very specifically addressing the local stations that have a cap on them as to how much, how many people they can reach, and saying, you need me so that you can have more power. So maybe you should do this. It's exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly. And, this is actually a pretty old lesson. Even after World War II, the U.S. government commissioned studies to figure out what was it that allowed the rise of Nazism in Germany. And they found that industrial monopolists actually helped facilitate the rise of Hitler. As a result, Congress passed something called the 1950 Anti-Merger Act because they worried that extreme consolidation in America could also lead to the rise of anti-democratic pressures. So these are lessons that were so central to our country for decades. Unfortunately, as we adopted a legal regime that was so much more permissive of mergers, of economic consolidation, it's brought us to the situation we're in today.
So Nextstar's proposed merger with Tegna, another group that owns TV stations, would give it reach into roughly 80% of television households. The FCC's current rule is 39% is the maximum. Give me some antitrust thinking on this. From a merger antitrust perspective, what dangers arise when a handful of companies or conglomerates control so much of what we consume?
I mean, there's so many risks that come from that type of concentration: higher prices, lower wages, less choice, less innovation. But these risks are especially acute when you're talking about media markets, because this is really about controlling the flow of information, controlling the flow of news. And once you consolidate so much power and allow a handful of companies, a handful of executives to basically flip the switch on what type of news and information people are getting, it's extremely dangerous. And so it's not enough to just have a First Amendment in theory. Actually being able to exercise free speech rights means having markets where you're even able to access the free flow of information, rather than markets where you just have a handful of gatekeepers dictating what people see.
Yeah, I thought that was so good. Lena Khan, go watch the whole interview and everything else that Velshi does every Saturday and Sunday. 2 hours on Saturday, 2 hours on Sunday, with the best guests anybody has in all of cable TV, especially including the rest of the week, I would say, but on the weekend. And nobody's better and smarter and more modest and doesn't make it about him like Ali Velshi. I just think he's the best on all of cable news, and I think that show is as well. All right, so what else do I have? How about Josh Shapiro? He's the Pennsylvania governor, Democrat. He sat down with Meet the Press, Kirsten Welker on NBC.
Because President Trump has said maybe we should revoke the licenses of other TV networks. What are the implications of that? What was your gut when you first heard that?
In a society where we have less freedom, which is what the president is doing, restricting one's ability to speak, which is enshrined in the First Amendment of our Constitution, we are all less safe. We are all less free. And if you attack someone today because of a particular political viewpoint, what's to say you're not going to attack someone tomorrow, silence someone tomorrow because of what they look like, how they pray, who they love? It's a really dangerous and slippery slope.
All right, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. Now let's head to the Senate Majority Leader, the always ineffective Chuck Schumer, on CNN, talking about the potential for a government shutdown. And how will the Democrats handle that?
And I hope and pray that Trump will sit down with us and negotiate a bipartisan bill. That's how it's always been done in the past. That's how shutdowns have been avoided in the past.
Well, this isn't the past. It's not what?
He doesn't. I'm just confirming here. You will vote no. Is that correct?
We are hoping, Dana, that he will negotiate with us.
And if he
doesn't? So far he hasn't. And we've had 2 bills in the House and Senate, and neither of them have passed. Our Democrats are firm. We need to get something done to relieve the distress the American people are in.
Okay, that sounded like a yes, but you can confirm that, and then I want to move on. Is that accurate?
Yeah. The bottom line is we must get a better bill than what they have.
The last time.
Oh my gosh, he's so bad. He's so bad. He's got to go. I'm really very much against Chuck Schumer. Pretty much always have been. Never been much of a fan of the Shoe Man. But all right. Well, I was in the car all day and didn't get to pull as many audio clips as I would have wanted, but I will go back to Friday and the Late Show with Stephen Colbert to end on some jokes before we get to my conversation with the great Randi Weingarten. Here is Colbert on Friday night.
Tonight, we are all Jimmy Kimmel. I still have a show, though, right? Okay, good. Yesterday, after threats from Trump's FCC chair, ABC yanked Kimmel off the air indefinitely. That is blatant censorship, and it always starts small. You know, remember like in week 1 of his presidency, Gulf of America. Call it Gulf of America. Sure, seems harmless, but with an autocrat, you cannot give an inch. And if ABC thinks that this is going to satisfy the regime, they are woefully naive. And clearly, they've never read the children's book, If You Give a Mouse a Kimmel. And to Jimmy, just let me say, I stand with you and your staff 100%. And also, you couldn't let me enjoy this for like 1 week.
He's holding up the Emmy. All right, that's all I've got for you today. And the A block, the first part of the show, the news clips, headlines, and the opening. That's what I call it, at least. And now it's time to get to the part where maybe you skipped ahead to anyway, my interview. And today my guest is one of the best. I'm so happy to have her back on the show. She has been a long-time friend of mine, supporter of my work. I've spoken at the AFT's annual convention twice. She has served as the AFT president since 2008. Of course, it's 1.8 million educators and healthcare professionals and public service workers that make up that union. And before that, she represented educators in New York City. She also taught social studies in high school in Brooklyn. And this new book is so good. It's so important. And I learned a lot from it, a lot that I didn't know. But just reading a little bit from the jacket to get us set up. Attacks on schools and teachers have long been a hallmark of fascist regimes. One of Hitler's first tasks after taking power was to force every teacher in the country to pledge fealty to the Nazi Party. I did not know that. I did not know the Hitler's enforcement of educators. They go on in the jacket and says, fascists fear teachers because teachers foster an educated and empowered population that can see past propaganda and scare tactics. Fascists fear teachers because they teach young people how to think for themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to have joining me. You can watch this on YouTube. We were talking live just a couple of days ago. The president of the American Federation of Teachers, the author of this new book, which I hope you will go buy and give to everybody you know, every educator you know, a great gift or suggestion to get. Why Fascists Fear Teachers, Public Education and the Future of Democracy. Let's do it right now with Randi Weingarten. Thank you for joining me. It's great to see you, my friend. I've been following you for a long time. I interviewed you several times. This is quite a moment we're in.
Yep, it is quite a moment we're in. I'm wearing a T-shirt today that says with the banned books because, these culture wars have really created an environment that is pretty terrible for, I would say, parents and teachers and kids. And what teachers are trying to do is they're really trying to break through all of this to actually create an environment where kids feel protected and honored and where they can learn.
Public education teachers in particular have been under attack for a really long time. I've been in that fight with you. My mom being a public school teacher, of course, having kids in the public schools. And you've seen...
And living in the place where I grew up.
I live...
Seems unrecognizable to me.
I am raising my daughters, or raised, they're 17 and 20, one's in college now, in the same district that Randi grew up in. And we've been in communication about how much it's changed. And you've been shocked to see that change in such a short period of time since growing up here yourself. But that's where, so when getting to the book, I think it helps to define fascism as well as we can. And man, I had no idea about some of the history that you talk about in the book, specifically with Norway's teachers and fascism. American fascism isn't the same as German fascism or as even Italian fascism at the same time. I think it's important to have some discernment there, obviously, but make no mistake, that is a pretty good definition of where we're at according to fascism experts. How do you define what we are seeing in America in 2025 as fascism?
Well, part of what I wanted to do, and look, Rachel Maddow did this as well. I thought she did this brilliantly in her books, talking about the story of American fascism in the 30s, in the 30s and 40s in particular, Prequel and her other books. But what I tried to do in terms of the definition of fascism is I watched at the end of the November 2024 elections how when two generals created a warning sign about their experiences with then President Trump and Trump won and used the term fascism, there was a blowback on the generals. And part of that blowback was that people don't understand the term. And so what I wanted to do is, as a school teacher, is describe fascistic behavior And I'm trying to use the exercise of critical thinking. So basically, people then apply the term as opposed to whether or not I'm going to label somebody this way. Because if I labeled somebody this way, the whole conversation is going to be, is she right? Is she wrong? As opposed to understanding the behaviors. So let me talk about the behaviors. That's why let me dwell on this and answer your question this way, Pete.
Please. Yeah.
The behaviors of fascistic behavior starts with what we see very much politically, even in our country, and us versus them. But it gets much, much worse because it creates a rage. The strong man creates a rage and an anger and a cultural anger. And it doesn't just say that the us is better. It demonizes the them to such a point, dehumanizes, demonizes, makes the them into a speck that justifies the violence against the them. So the example I often use is not the concentration camps in terms of Germany, in terms of Nazism. The example I often use, not in the book, but I've been using, is think about Austria after the German takeover, after the Nazi takeover, and what they did to the Jews. They had Jews on their hands and knees washing streets in their best clothes, on their hands and knees washing streets. Think about how dehumanizing that picture is of people. And so fascists create that level of dehumanization of the them with a sense that the only entity that is going to be the savior is the fascistic government. Right. It is a style of government. It is, and that's what they do. And so why fascists are afraid of teachers, and I start with the Norwegian story about the paper clips, is because what teachers do is two things. They bring community together. They create a safe and welcoming environment in their classrooms and hopefully on their campuses. And the second thing they do is they teach critical thinking and problem solving and the habits of democracy so that hopefully kids can discern fact from fiction, information from misinformation. We want kids to figure out how to think, or to help kids get to how to think, not what to think. But all of this is what teachers try to do in their classrooms. That's why my first chapter is about critical thinking, something the founders really wanted for kids to be able to do. Yeah, and my second chapter is about safe and welcoming environments.
Yeah, and the whole book is so good. I love this book. I love pretty much everything you do and say. There's no doubt that I've been a big fan and supporter of yours for years now, of course. But the issue on critical thinking, we hear those words and we have different ideas come to mind. What does it mean? Am I a critical thinker, Randi, do you think?
Let me put aside the fact that I love you dearly and not
just say no.
Have that
It'd be funnier if it just
bias,
not you, Pete.
and not have that bias my views. But in all the different conversations that we've had, Pete, look, the questions you ask, you've read the book, you asked a question about fascistic behavior. I talked to you just now about what it is, how you apply it. And then what you did was you
made it about me.
Based upon that answer, you asked me, you asked me another question.
Yeah.
That's critical thinking. That's the kind of taking information and being able to apply it and build on it. That's critical thinking.
How is critical thinking?
So I think the answer is yes.
How is critical thinking taught in schools? I went to the final Meet the Teacher night because my younger daughter is a senior. And by the way, parents are really checking out by that final Meet the Teacher night. But my daughter's in a lot of hard classes, and I like to meet the teachers and who are with my daughter, and mostly I'd like to support them.
Is she taking AP Gov?
Yes. Yes, she is.
Is she taking the class I love to teach?
She's taking it, but the teacher's teaching it for the first year. And he kept saying, this stuff can get pretty dry. And I was like, this should not be hard to make exciting, in my opinion, especially now. But he's trying to thread a needle in front of parents. He's like, it's interesting times. But the reason I bring this up in terms of critical thinking is one of the things that the teacher said was we have the students take different sides of an issue, including a side they certainly wouldn't support, and then learn to defend it.
Correct.
And I thought, well, that's a great kind of way to describe critical thinking. In her sociology class, they're reading all these different essays around all kinds of different theories. That's critical thinking. But it's so often we are told that teachers are indoctrinating students. I think the opposite is true. They're teaching them to not be indoctrinated and to critically think. And that's what fascists suppose. How am I doing on my definition of critical thinking?
I think you're doing well. I mean, I think what the extreme right is very good at is essentially labeling something the opposite of what we actually do.
Yes, they are.
So when you actually do but notice what the teacher said because of being concerned about, things being weaponized. So we have to have many, many more conversations with parents these days about what we're doing and why to ensure that we can actually do our job. But I used to love, I used to love doing a debate around the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I mean, clearly there is a moral high ground here, which should be obvious. In retrospect, I would say most of us believe that we should never have bombed or create an atomic bomb on people, period, full stop. And that's why you've had, in the last X number of years, all of these guardrails and treaties against nuclear arsenals. But to take the position that is opposite what you really believe is a way of developing the muscle of seeing a different side and of being to argue a different side and doing it in debate is really important. Now, the question you asked is, are we doing enough of it? Look, if we don't have more than 5 minutes to do a debate on this, that's not doing enough of it.
Right.
The way in which, and I've been very critical of the fact that the accountability systems have moved schools to focus on test prep and far too much because people are very concerned about the scores. And you see why, because the scores get weaponized against people. But the way to really teach is to take the time to let kids prepare with each other and to do project-based instruction. And a debate is a perfectly fantastic way of doing project-based instruction. But you don't spend 5 minutes in a class preparing for that debate. If you really want to do it well, you spend a few days preparing for that debate. You do that in a group. But when you do that, then you haven't finished the curriculum. And then what have you done in terms of preparing kids for the regents? So the way in which accountability gets done and testing gets done in public schools across America has actually diminished, particularly before you get to the AP courses, has diminished our ability to really teach critical thinking. And where I have seen it done well, actually, is in career tech ed courses, where we are teaching a trade or teaching a workforce skill, because that is actually developed around project-based instruction and performance assessments. And we should be doing more and more of that in academic classwork, as opposed to trying to race through every aspect of a curriculum to get ready for, a Regents test or a fourth grade or an eighth grade test.
Yeah. Discussion, debate, writing, reading. But practicing science is something that's also, I think, helps develop critical thinking, right? Because I didn't like science very much. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. I hated math for sure. but doing science labs and learning about biology and chemistry and physics, just a little bit, just enough to know that this is A, something I don't want to study, and B, something I want to trust experts on. But just learning the scientific method helps teach critical thinking. That's another part of like a lot of what you're doing in school. I believe there should be more doing because that's how I learned by doing. But in science labs are a great example of, I think, critical thinking too. I don't know if you'd.
I mean, think about things that are not new. Socratic method
Sure.
is a really important way of teaching social studies. And, we do it in law schools, but, sometimes it's used to, basically embarrass people. But Socratic method, Socrates, really important in terms of asking questions, seeing all sides of an issue, and scientific method is really important. But we have to get kids reading again. And part of what is happening this school year is the no distraction cell phone, basically cell phone bans are really important because what's happening, and I love this, one of my teacher colleagues said, who's teaching right now, said, kids, and she whispered this to me, she said, kids are writing notes to each other in classrooms again. I said, how great.
That's
she
awesome.
Said, kids,
that's awesome.
And another teacher said to me, kids are talking to each other in the hall again, as opposed to just focused on their screen like this.
Kids are learning to write in the tiniest handwriting and the tiniest piece of paper to cheat on the test. Are they doing that yet? That was my thing.
Look, it's part of why I think we're going to actually go back to blue books. Like I've said, because I feel like I'm so old. I'm like, remember the blue books? And I get this blank expression, right. So I think, okay, we're going to have to go back to penmanship, and we're going to have to go back to doing an essay or a test in class on a blue book instead of
I had a test, one of my final
be there and cut and paste.
I love that. My 10th grade final exam, it was a question. I had to write an essay about the work of Martin Luther, not Dr. King. And I didn't know who it was, so I decided to write an impassioned essay about Dr. Martin Luther King. Knew I was writing the wrong one, and the teacher said, you were talking about the wrong person, but it was so good that I'll give you credit. That's how wrong I was. But I really cared about what I learned about MLK. In the last thing I want to say about the critical thinking thing in this first chapter, you talk about teaching democracy, which I think is so important. But you write, if you don't mind, critical thinking is the heart of democracy, the muscle of the core that keeps democracy healthy and strong. We don't tell our students who to vote for. We don't tell our students what to believe. We teach them how to think for themselves, why democracy is important, and how they're an important part of making it work and making it better. But rather than help teachers build a stronger America based on knowledge and truth and freedom of thought, fascists use fear, bullying, and culture wars to try to shut down teaching and democracy. I saw it last night at a school board meeting. I see it every day in the news. Why is teaching democracy so important? I feel like most Americans, including kids in school today, don't even know what democracy is because they've had some semblance of it their whole life. So they certainly don't know what it looks like to not have it.
I think that's part of the reason why I felt the need to have this provocative title and to define fascistic behavior without labeling any particular person as a fascist. I think people don't know. We use the term democracy so much. People don't know what it means. Americans love freedom. Americans want freedom of thought. Americans want freedom of religion. And Americans want themselves to be free. Tim Snyder talks about it as me speech versus free speech.
Right.
What has happened of late, and this has been, and you see it this week, is that the shutting other people down, instead of listening, the shutting other people down, the bullying, the saying you're wrong without even hearing someone, the censoring. I believe in Americans and I believe in our kids. And I think if we actually could teach kids the habits of democracy and of freedom of thought and how to think and how to discern fact from fiction, our kids would do a whole lot better than we're doing right now. And so I would say to anybody who disagrees with me, look, you may have agreed with everything that somebody at that Orangetown school board meeting was saying yesterday. I'm saying this to anybody who thinks, but if you don't believe that the other side should have the same rights as you, that's a big problem. Everybody needs to have those same rights. And then how do you create a society? Because under the rule of law, we're governed by the people through our elected officials. That's what democracy is. We do it through a constitution that tells us what the rules of the game are. And if somebody says, I have the right to vote for someone, but you don't, I have the right to express myself, but you don't, that's where democracy fails.
Right.
We need to lift up everybody's rights in terms of the engagement and listen to everybody.
I think that's where democracy fails, and that's where fascism begins, because if we're both playing by the same set of rules, that's more like democracy. But if you're cheating to win and erasing history, yesterday they made museums take down a picture of a slave who had been whipped. Every day, yesterday the Department of Justice took down the website that had their own work study saying that the vast majority of domestic terrorism was coming from the right. They're erasing things.
Right. Erasing history.
How is that?
And then they're yelling at someone who's pointing out that they're erasing history.
Exactly.
So it's not only that they're erasing history, then when you point out that they're erasing history, they yell at you.
And tell you to.
So it is.
To tone down your rhetoric.
So this is why I wanted people to understand the behavior, the us versus them, and doing it more demagogically and more demagogically. So not only is the them not having their side of the debate or their factual side or their history out there, but then those who are fighting for the them are dehumanized, or the them themselves are dehumanized so much that it's only the us. And this is what is so ironic about this moment of time, if I may, not just about schooling, but about everything else, that Donald Trump is not even helping the us. Like, the us voted for Donald Trump, not just if you think about the people who voted for him. They voted for him mostly to make the economy better. And the economy is worse.
Right.
Prices are up. And so the irony here is that the us that he supposedly is fighting for are actually in worse shape. But my book is really about how teachers are the antidote to all of this, because if fascists are trying to create rage so that the them are more and more and more dehumanized, and there's so much fear and there's so much anger that it's the beloved strongman who is the one who is basically you're relying on. The us is relying on them. What teachers do is they actually basically say, no. Everyone should be entitled to a safe and welcoming environment, not just those who are following the strongman, but everyone. And what teachers do is say, look, pluralism and all of us getting along, regardless of whether we're Republicans, Democrats, or independents, kids getting along, having a safe and welcoming environment, that's really important. And what teachers then do is also say, and we're teaching kids to prepare for their lives. They need these critical thinking and problem-solving skills for work as well as for, their life, as well as for civic engagement. It's not just for college. They need it in every aspect of their lives. So teachers are actually, when I say teachers are the antidotes, and I tell a lot of stories about teachers and how they have done this and who they are and what they do, that's the hope. And they're doing it regardless of what happened at the Orangetown School Board meeting yesterday. And they're doing it regardless of the slime and the smears that get thrown at them.
I mean,
that's why I love them.
I'll come back to chapter 2, but because you just brought up the fear that they have to live with, I want to ask you about the protections that they have to have. You, of course, are the president of a huge teachers union, not only teachers, of course, healthcare providers and more. But I talk to these teachers all the time, off the record especially. I try to tell them there's a group of parents in the community that are doing our best to protect them. But let's be honest, without the protections that they have from their union, they would be even more afraid of just losing their job and more likely to do whatever it takes to keep that job and to be able to do what they want to do, which is teach kids. Teachers are being threatened all the time, not only by any statement they might post on social media, which most, teachers are pretty careful about that, but of course, what they're teaching in the classroom. Suddenly, things that weren't very controversial are becoming controversial. I'm not talking about history and literature or anything related to sex. I'm talking about like social and emotional learning. I'm talking about diversity. All of a sudden, these are bad things. If teachers didn't have the protection that they have of their unions, they would probably be a lot more intimidated. And I would argue that they are in the states where they don't have strong labor protections. What do you say about that? Because you do write about the importance of unions and organizing.
You're totally right. You're totally right. So if you think about power, if I may use that word, power in America, if you think about how anyone has any power to influence their own lives, to have a better life for themselves and their family, there's kind of three things that do it. Education, something economic. Let me do the second one. Politics. You elect people that you hope are going to Congress to do your will, not the will of billionaires or others. And the third is labor. And most people are not born with a silver spoon in their mouths. Most people don't have personal economic power, and they get their power, their economic power, from collective bargaining. And teachers happen to be more unionized these days in America than pretty much anyone else in America. And so just like there's been a 60-year fight by corporate America to de-unionize people, by calling people all sorts of names, by fighting every single which way to stop people from unionizing, by restricting who can unionize, what they do is they smear unions and smear people who lead unions, like me, so that they can try to create a cultural disconnect between the members and the unions, or between the public and the unions. That's what the Janus case was, when they said, okay, you don't have to join your union, you can opt out of it. And guess what? In New York State, 98% of the people, despite everything that gets thrown at them, keep on staying in their unions because they know what you just said, which is at the end of the day, somebody has to have your back. And for teachers, it's in New York State, it's NYSET. It's the local union. It's the Clarkstown Teachers Association, which I remember my teachers being part of. It's the Orangetown Teachers Association. It's the Nyack Teachers Association. And you mentioned NYSET. My member, which my mother was part of.
Oh, yeah? You mentioned NYSET. NYSET is the union that represents New York State teachers, and I would always see that on envelopes that would come to the house when I was younger. I didn't know what it meant, but my mom was, of course, a member. I was talking to my mom the other day, and she was just talking about how so much of her health care is covered because she was a teacher. And I'm like, yeah, you better believe it, because she taught in a real hard school for over 20 years, and it's the least they can do is take care of her health care bills. And those are the protections, so I always like to mention that. And you also talk about...
And what they do, this is what these protections mean. It just gives you the benefit of the doubt. And every worker should have the benefit of the doubt. You should just be able to say, this is why I did what I did. None of us, I would say, every one of us who have gone into teaching, we do it because we want to make a difference in the lives of kids. Why else would you go into teaching? You feel a passion not only to the work you do, but it's to kids. It's to watch. And what do teachers tell me more than anything else? when I see that connection with kids, when I see what has happened, oh my God, that makes my day. That's what teachers in their professional pursuit live for. I don't understand, and I'm not naive. I do not understand why this is not a cherished American principle and why there's constantly the demonizing. One of the people who demonize education all the time, already this week he's threatened to sue me because I've used his words where he said the way you get to universal vouchers is you create universal public school distrust. And sometimes you have to be ruthless and brutal. How dare anyone? That's what I'm lifting up. That's what I'm exposing. How dare anyone say that about public schooling, about teachers, about what happens in classrooms? Somebody does something wrong. Okay, deal with it. But universally, parents are under enough pressure. We need to create and make schools into the safe and welcoming places they should. And we need to give teachers some level of authority and discretion to be able to meet the needs of kids. How is that not a cherished public policy, American patriotism in this world, in this country?
I mean, you know all the reasons why that is.
That's what I exposed. That's what I exposed in this book. That's why I wrote this book, because that's what teachers try to do.
Right.
Why is it smeared? Why is it reviled? Why is it not supported? It doesn't mean we shouldn't strengthen schools. Of course we should. Of course we have to. But what happened in that school board meeting for you last night, it's like, think about, let me do this. Let me say it the opposite way. Think about since Charlie Kirk's assassination. Social media companies failed us because the video of that assassination was everywhere immediately. And on every channel, every child saw it. The next day, in classrooms across America, or that afternoon, teachers are having to deal with it to try to assure kids that they're safe. Parents are having to deal with it. Why wasn't at the school board meeting this week lifting up what teachers did to denounce violence and to try to help kids be safe? That would have been an off-ramp. That would have been the way we figure out in Orangetown or Clarkstown or anywhere else, how do you lift community and create an off-ramp so we are all denouncing political violence? But instead, it is, let's figure out a way to weaponize it.
Do you think, I just kind of thought of this, and I'm sure there's a lot of better ways of putting it and a lot of scholarship even on it, but isn't there, it feels like some people want to control what their kids learn in school and in life, and a lot of them homeschool as a result, maybe, and other people like you and me and most teachers and educators want to teach kids how to learn. Less about what you learn and controlling what you learn. I want to teach you how to learn. I want to give you all kinds of different subject matter to choose from so you can find out what you might be interested in or have an aptitude for. And then back to the critical thinking. It's not about control. It's about giving a student or someone else as much control as they can have about their own destiny, which providing them with a bunch of information, contrasting ideas is the way.
So I would say, and this may be where you and I may differ a little bit on this, which is we have to make sure that parents are part of that equation in a real way. Meaning that's why having meetings with parents at the beginning of the year as a school teacher, explaining what you're trying to do, getting parental buy-in is so important because, a parent is a kid's first teacher. And they're going to, particularly in the younger ages, they want and they have a right to the kind of control and discretion they want for their kids to have. I don't have a right to substitute my judgment for the judgment of a parent in terms of a young kid. I just don't, and I shouldn't. But the issue becomes our job is to open up minds, and our job is to understand the environment, and our job is to prepare kids for whatever that environment is. So we have to work with parents to get to exactly where you said. And that's the rub, is there's not enough discussion in the way in which you and I are discussing it. Look, I just said I may disagree with you on some things. Look at how we're discussing it. We're not screaming at each other. We're saying, and we have to, but those kind of conversations, they don't happen much. Like take the Maryland district, where which created the Mahmoud case that happened last year in the Supreme Court. There is a rule that parents have an opt-out in that district if they don't want certain books or a certain curriculum. And it wasn't used. And instead, what ended up happening is the case goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, yeah, parents have this right. That has this opt-out. The opt-out should have been used. And yes, as a gay person, I clearly want us to really acknowledge and understand gay families, but you have to be able to have that conversation with parents so that parents understand what you as a school teacher are doing and that you become partners there. And when that happens, we end up being able to effectively teach.
One of the things that fascists do really well is propaganda and branding. And where we might differ on this parent input thing is only because I'm been in the fight and you are representing teachers and you know that you have to, and I know that you really believe bringing parents into the fold, but I'm cynical in such a way that I've always been in the fold. I've always been involved with my daughter's schools and teachers. And it really bothers the hell out of me when parents that never, ever attended a parent-teacher meeting or meet the teacher or did any volunteer work start coming and telling the teachers what they can and can't do and teach. Yeah. They have used a phrase called parental rights that is extremely effective. And that's what I push back on because, of course, you have parental rights. What bothers the shit out of me is that you haven't been accessing them, and all of a sudden, given a fragment of information, you're screaming at teachers and telling them how to teach. You didn't do anything. You weren't taking any interest until, frankly, specifically Turning Point USA came into the Clarkstown School District and handed out buttons and told lies about what was happening in our school, and then they screamed parental rights. Nonsense. You were never in these schools until tonight. That's what bothers me.
And look, it bothers me. I mean, you and I've had enough conversations that it bothers me too. My job is that I have to get through the clack and I have to get through the noise.
Yeah.
And that's why you do all the things. And I mean, look, it's part of the reason that it's absolutely essential that we have parent participation in an organized manner in schools all the time. Because when you have that, when you have PTAs that are functioning, when you have parent-teacher community that's functioning, then what ends up happening is that community actually starts saying to people who are fearful or who have been organized to, try to disrupt or all of this other stuff, that community starts saying to that people, hey, why don't you come? Why don't you be with us? Yeah. Why don't you act with us? And then all of a sudden it starts isolating what the real motives are. There's a story, Pete, from that the old 60 Minutes did about a South Carolina community where there were lots of books that were banned and there was getting into a huge debate and fight. And there was a group of parents who became a committee with teachers, and they worked together on what should be available in the library, the school library, and what shouldn't. So they went from, I don't remember the number, 60 to 100 books that were banned to maybe 3 to 5 books that were banned.
Sure.
And what happened was the community itself learned so much about teaching and learning because they engaged in this process, and it was so affirming. It completely changed the way in which the community looked at schools, looked at each other, the conversations. And 60 Minutes and 60 Minutes had the Moms for Liberty group of people that were trying to do the banning, who were kind of, you remember this? They then started looking at their notes and they didn't know what to say. I mean, it exposed the politics for what it was, which was disruption and undermining of schooling. And it empowered basically a conservative group of community activists and parents to basically say, no, this is what our schools should be. And that's the kind of advocacy that I'm pushing for.
The Moms for Liberty has a chapter in Clarkstown, and one of the big issues, they're very anti-trans, kids transitioning from one gender to another. The irony is the Moms of Liberty chapter is founded by a man. Like, there wasn't a woman who wanted to found the Moms. It had to be a guy who is against trans people, but he's pretending online to be a woman to create Moms of Liberty. Anyway, I will let you go. I want everybody to go get the book, but my last question is about the way forward. And you know, you mentioned it, I think, in the opening of the book when you talk about what the Norwegian teachers and students did. I feel like we're here. I feel like the worst of it has arrived.
Yeah.
This paperclip story is amazing. I had never heard it, I don't think. They all started wearing paperclips to signal to each other, and some even made necklaces out of the paperclips. It's a fascinating and tragic story. But it's different then than it is here, obviously. But we are here. We've arrived. I think we're living in whatever – people are using different words, but I think fascist is very applicable. It's getting worse. I am finding that my role here, my purpose is that we're not going to change this overnight. We're not going back to what we believe. So if we're here now, to me, one of the best things we can do is build communities. And I'm finding all kinds of ways to build community. You talk about that in the book. That has to be part of the way forward for public schools and public educators and the public in general. Go ahead.
King said this in his last book as well. Chaos versus community. That was his question to all of us basically at the end of his life. The most important thing we can do is build community, is have people build a big tent, have people who have first similar values and then similar aspirations and similar needs or wants or interests, and keep on building bigger and bigger tents, because we, the people, nobody's going to save us but ourselves. We, the people, really believe in an America that is about aspiration for all. I really believe that. I could not be a school teacher or a unionist for as long as I've been if I didn't believe that. And teachers every day try to get the best out of people and the best out of our kids and try to help them thrive and have this habits and develop the muscles and the skills they need. Education and community are the answer. We have to speak up. We have to stand up. We have to show up. And we have to start with the value of not fear and hate, but love and hope. That's who teachers are. And that is why fascists fear them so much.
So well said. So well written. What a great book. You're an American treasure. I am so glad to count you as a friend and a mentor. Always so inspired by your work and your fearlessness and your courage with which you do it. And I really appreciate you joining me here today. Thank you so much, Randi. Congratulations. I hope everybody goes and gets this book. It's integral to the way forward.
Thank you. And go to your favorite bookstore to get it, or, order it from the way in which you order books. But Pete, thank you so much. And thank you for continuing to fight in Rockland County for what's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there you go, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today and for supporting me with a paid subscription. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. You can always pay more than $5 if you're getting more than $5 worth if you think. I don't know how you would interpret such things, but, if you listen every day, break it down. Whatever you got, and you can throw this way to support this daily show. It's the bulk of my work these days. I'm pretty dedicated to it, as I think you probably know if you're a regular listener. Hope to see you at our Hangouts, and you can be a part of our community anytime on the Discord platform where you're never alone. All right, that's all I've got for you. I think I'll be hosting a Hangout tonight for just about an hour because my parents are going to be in town for my daughter's birthday this weekend, and they're coming down for a couple days. And so I will see you tonight at 8 East if you're a paid subscriber. If you're not, sign up now and join us. Should be a great talk. And I will see you tonight, my honeybees, listening all the way to the end. That means you're a honeybee, in case you didn't know. Change it from bumblebee to honeybee after Farm Jam. Okay, bye, love you.
Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.